In the history of British intelligence, one scandal shook the foundations of the government, exposed the overreach of secret agencies, and forever changed the relationship between the state and its citizens. This was the Spycatcher Affair, a pivotal moment that dragged MI5 out of the shadows and placed it under democratic scrutiny. The affair not only revealed the truth about Soviet infiltration into the British establishment, but also told the story of a lone man branded a traitor who fought to disclose what he believed was the ultimate truth. When Peter Wright, a former MI5 counterintelligence officer, published his memoir Spycatcher, he ignited a protracted and notorious legal battle. It was not just a story of a spy revealing secrets, but a direct confrontation between a conservative government led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and an individual determined to tear down the long-standing veil of secrecy. The affair was significant because it lifted the curtain on a hidden world where MI5 and MI6 operated without legal oversight, potentially breaking laws and trampling civil liberties in the name of national security. The Spycatcher Affair revealed that these law-breaking activities were not isolated incidents, but part of MI5's operational culture. At the heart of this story is Peter Wright, a complex and contradictory figure. Wright joined MI5 in 1955 as its first scientific officer, a groundbreaking move at the time. His mission was to modernize surveillance and reconnaissance technology, a role that gave him unprecedented insight into the failures and infiltrations within the British intelligence system. For over 2 decades, from 1955 to 1976, Wright became MI5's leading mole hunter, investigating some of the most infamous espionage scandals of the Cold War era, including those involving John Vassell, George Blake, and most notably, the Cambridge Five. Through this process, he uncovered evidence of Soviet moles not only within intelligence agencies, but also throughout the British elite, from top universities to the government itself. The purpose of recounting this story is not merely to narrate events, but to delve into the core of the Spycatcher Affair. With the assistance of Tim Tate, an investigative journalist and author of numerous books on intelligence, we will explore the true story behind the public headlines. Drawing on previously unpublished court transcripts, secret government files, and key interviews, we will hear testimonies never before accessible to the public. From admissions by senior officials that they were economical with the truth in court, to revelations about the British government's collusion with journalists to leak information, earlier this story will shed light on a dark corner of British politics. Peter Wright's story and his book highlighted an unbelievable reality for a long-time MI5 and MI6 operated outside the framework of the law. No statute defined their powers or limits. They were accountable solely to the Prime Minister. Their budgets were secret, and their operations, as Wright famously said, involved bugging and burgling without warrants. By exposing these actions, Wright challenged one of the foundations of the British government, the belief in absolute secrecy. Though some branded him a traitor, Wright became a catalyst for bringing intelligence agencies under democratic oversight, forcing them to adhere to the law and respect citizens' rights. The Spycatcher Affair was not just a legal battle. It was a historical lesson about the power of truth, the importance of press freedom, and the necessity of accountability in government. It is a complex tale interwoven with loyalty, betrayal, and a dramatic struggle to expose the truth about one of the greatest intelligence scandals in modern history. Peter Wright, the mole hunter. Peter Wright was not only the author of the controversial book Spycatcher, but also the central figure who lived fully within the world of secrets and betrayal he later exposed. His story begins in 1955 when he joined MI5 as its first scientific officer. At the time, MI5 still relied on outdated traditional methods, leaning heavily on human intelligence and classic investigative techniques. However, Wright, with his scientific background, was tasked with a pioneering mission modernizing surveillance technology. He was responsible for developing bugging tracking and burglary tools, which later became central to his accusations of MI5's law-breaking activities. Wright's role was not limited to technological development. With his deep technical expertise, he was quickly assigned MI5's most critical task-hunting moles. Appointed as the Chief Counterintelligence Officer, a position he held for over 20 years, from 1955 to 1976, Wright operated during the height of the Cold War when Britain faced a series of high-profile espionage scandals. In this role, he witnessed and participated in major investigations, such as those involving John Vassell and George Blake. However, the case that defined his career and beliefs was the investigation into the Cambridge Five. While investigating these cases, Wright gradually uncovered a shocking truth. The Soviet Union had infiltrated the highest levels of the British establishment. This was not limited to MI5, but extended to MI6 and other government sectors. As the officer responsible for hunting moles, he began noticing a disturbing pattern. Despite MI5 officers collecting clear evidence of Soviet spies, this evidence was often ignored or mishandled. He started to suspect that there was a fox in the henhouse, a Soviet spy within MI5 itself leaking their counterintelligence operations. Wright's suspicions particularly focused on two senior figures, MI5 Director General Sir Roger Hollis and Deputy Director General Graham Mitchell. Though he could never definitively prove they were spies, Wright gathered substantial circumstantial evidence and defector testimonies suggesting high-level betrayal. MI5's technical efforts to counter the Soviets consistently failed in the late 1950s and mid-1960s, reinforcing his belief that a traitor was operating from within. Wright's journey at MI5 gave him an intimate view of the agency's culture, which he described as operating with impunity. He famously stated that MI5 bugged and burgled across London with ease. According to him, the agency operated with little oversight, ignoring legal and civil boundaries. Illegal activities like burglaries, phone tapping, and mail interception were not only accepted, but standard practice. Wright believed this lack of accountability enabled Soviet infiltration and illegal plots to flourish within MI5. Upon retiring in 1976 and moving to Tasmania, Wright carried a deep sense of frustration with the British government and his former agency. He felt betrayed and deceived. Despite dedicating his life to service, his discoveries were suppressed, and those he suspected of treason escaped justice. This frustration drove him to write Spycatcher. He wanted the world to know the truth. He uncovered MI5's inefficiencies, government cover-ups, and the shocking extent of Soviet infiltration. Peter Wright was not merely a former spy revealing secrets. He was a man on a mission. He sought to expose a system he believed was rotten from within, hoping the truth would force intelligence agencies to be accountable, paving the way for an era of transparency and accountability. His struggle to publish the book was not just a personal battle, but a fight for press freedom and the public's right to know. This is Peter Wright's legacy, the man who laid the foundation for bringing MI5 out of the cold and into the scrutiny of modern democracy. The Secret World of MI5 and MI6. To truly understand why the Spycatcher Affair was so seismic, we must step back and examine the context of British intelligence agencies during the Cold War. From the 1950s to the 1980s, MI5, the Domestic Intelligence Agency, and MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, operated in a world almost entirely invisible to the public. Their existence was not officially acknowledged, and British governments for decades maintained a policy of ambiguity regarding their roles and functions. This secrecy was not merely nominal. It had profound legal and political implications. These agencies operated without any parliamentary statute, lacking formal legal oversight. Instead, they were accountable solely to the Prime Minister. Their budgets were also a state secret approved discreetly without public scrutiny or questioning. This created an environment where, as Peter Wright described, intelligence agencies could act with impunity. This lack of accountability led to a culture Wright called lawless. In his book, he revealed that MI5 routinely engaged in bugging and burgling. MI5 officers freely broke into homes offices and foreign embassies in London without warrants or legal authorization. Phone calls were tapped and mail was intercepted, all without fear of legal repercussions. These actions violated not only national laws, but also the fundamental civil liberties of British citizens. This overreach was justified by a single rationale: national security. MI5's leadership believed that to protect the country from Soviet and extremist threats, they had to operate outside legal boundaries. They viewed secrecy and immunity as necessary tools to fulfill their mission effectively. However, as the Spycatcher Affair revealed, this lack of oversight allowed serious mistakes and even betrayal to flourish within the agency. This culture became even more dangerous when combined with the Soviet Union's sophisticated infiltration. From the 1930s, Soviet intelligence, particularly the NKVD predecessor to the KGB, adopted a long-term targeted recruitment strategy. They didn't just target low-level officials, but focused on young stars at elite universities like Cambridge and Oxford. These individuals, often with radical political ideals, were recruited as students and guided to infiltrate key positions in government media and, crucially, intelligence agencies. The most prominent success of this strategy was the Cambridge Five, a sophisticated spy ring that operated for decades. Key figures like Guy Burgess, Donald MacLean, Kim Philby, and Anthony Blunt were close friends from their university days and became pivotal Soviet spies. Though they were students in the 1930s, they were recruited by the Soviets and began covert operations at a young age. Guy Burgess was a charismatic but reckless figure, using his social connections to gain influence in political and journalistic circles. Donald MacLean, a promising diplomat, provided sensitive information on nuclear policy and international negotiations. Kim Philby, the jewel of the network, infiltrated MI6, becoming a senior intelligence officer and head of British counterintelligence in Washington, D.C., leaking British and American operations to the Soviets. Anthony Blunt, a talented art historian, was not only a spy, but a recruiter enlisting other students for the Soviets. The sudden defection of Guy Burgess and Donald MacLean to the Soviet Union in 1951 sent shockwaves through the British intelligence system. Though this immediately raised suspicions about Philby, MI6 ignored the warnings. They blindly trusted Philby, partly because he was so adept at covering his tracks and ingratiating himself with MI6 leaders. In reality, Philby had been feeding critical information to the Soviets for years, compromising agents and sabotaging Western operations. The existence of networks like the Cambridge Five fueled Peter Wright's suspicions. He noticed that MI5's counterintelligence operations were consistently thwarted, and information meant to be secure reached the Soviets. Later defectors provided further evidence, but this was often ignored or downplayed by MI5 leadership. Wright believed this inefficiency was not mere negligence, but the result of high-level betrayal. This infiltration extended beyond a few individuals. It permeated the British power structure, revealing a severe security flaw. However, instead of publicly acknowledging the failure, the British government chose to cover it up, fearing it would undermine public trust and damage relations with allies like the United States. The Spycatcher Affair, initiated by Peter Wright, became the strongest challenge to this cover-up. By telling his story, Wright not only named spies, but exposed the system that allowed them to operate. He forced the British government to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their intelligence agencies were not only infiltrated, but led by a culture of secrecy that enabled traitors to thrive undetected for decades. Ultimately, Wright's struggle ended an era where secrecy was valued over truth. Anthony Blunt, the spider at the center. Among the members of the Cambridge Five, Anthony Blunt stands out as the most complex and enigmatic. He was not just a spy, but a sophisticated spider weaving a web of espionage at the heart of the British establishment. His life was a strange blend of a brilliant, respected career and a duplicitous existence filled with betrayal. Born in 1907, Anthony Blunt studied at Cambridge University, quickly becoming a distinguished scholar specializing in art history. However, behind this scholarly facade was a radical political ideology. Like his contemporaries, Blunt was drawn to Marxism-Leninism in the 1930s. He not only became a Soviet spy, but also a talented recruiter. Using his position at Cambridge, he approached and enlisted bright young things, promising young students he believed would soon hold powerful positions in government. With the outbreak of war, Blunt infiltrated deeper into the system. He joined MI5 and was quickly assigned sensitive tasks due to his intelligence and connections. During World War II, he betrayed critical intelligence to the Soviets, severely damaging Allied operations. His role became even more peculiar post-war, as he continued freelance missions for MI5 and Buckingham Palace. His post-war mission to retrieve royal documents seized by the Nazis became a closely guarded secret. Blunt's success in concealing his true identity made him a pillar of the establishment. In 1956, he was appointed Keeper of the King's later Queen's Pictures, a highly prestigious role. Knighted the same year, he became a symbol of prestige and loyalty. This cover-up would not last forever. In the 1950s, MI5 identified Blunt as a Soviet spy. Instead of prosecution, the British government offered a secret deal immunity in exchange for cooperation and information. Peter Wright personally interrogated Blunt over an extended period from 1963 to 1971. This was a complex confrontation as Wright sought to unravel the espionage network, while Blunt carefully disclosed only enough to protect himself and conceal deeper secrets. The interrogation faced an unexpected obstacle: Buckingham Palace. At the time, the palace requested that MI5 avoid probing Blunt's post-war mission, particularly regarding the retrieval of royal documents. The exact reason for this request remains a mystery, but it raised questions about whether the royal family knew of Blunt's past or if other sensitive secrets needed protection. This connection further complicated and obscured the cover-up. Blunt's betrayal remained secret until 1979, when an investigative journalist exposed the story. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was forced to address Parliament claiming Blunt had come clean and was granted immunity for his information. His knighthood was stripped and his career collapsed. For Peter Wright, Blunt's immunity and the cover-up were an insult. It was clear evidence that the establishment was willing to protect its own and sacrifice justice for stability. The case of Anthony Blunt became a stark example of the divide between two worlds, one of justice and accountability, and another where rules were bent to protect the powerful. It was an indelible stain on the British security system and one of the primary motivations for Peter Wright to write Spycatcher, to expose a truth he believed could not be hidden forever. Ultimately, Blunt's story, the spider at the center of the espionage web, helped dismantle the veil of secrecy surrounding British intelligence agencies. Suspicions of high-level infiltration. When Peter Wright embarked on his investigation into Soviet infiltration, he quickly realized the issue extended beyond figures like Anthony Blunt or other Cambridge 5 members. His investigation led to a far more terrifying conclusion: a mole was operating at the highest levels of MI5. This obsession became the centerpiece of his life, driving him to hunt for evidence and ultimately to write Spycatcher. Wright's research was spurred by a series of operational failures at MI5. From the late 1950s to the mid-1960s, British counterintelligence efforts against the Soviets were consistently undermined. Evidence from bugs or break-ins often yielded no results, and Soviet spies seemed always one step ahead. Wright, a scientist and engineer, applied his logical analysis to identify the cause. He concluded that such consistent failures were impossible without a logical explanation. A Soviet spy was leaking sensitive information from within MI5. Wright's suspicions particularly targeted two of the agency's most powerful figures, MI5 Director General Sir Roger Hollis and Deputy Director General Graham Mitchell. Both held strategic positions, giving them access to and control over nearly all sensitive counterintelligence information. Wright lacked direct evidence, but amassed significant circumstantial evidence and defector testimonies pointing to high-level betrayal. Though insufficient for courtroom prosecution to Wright, these were clear signs of treason. He believed Hollis, who led MI5 during a critical period, could be the crack allowing Soviet operations to succeed. Wright argued that Hollis obstructed deeper investigations into suspects, including Anthony Blunt. His indecision in handling serious cases further fueled suspicions. Although official reports later claimed Hollis was cleared, Wright remained convinced he was a spy, or at least concealed the truth to protect someone else. The suspicions about Hollis and Mitchell were not mere paranoia from a disillusioned officer. Soviet defectors like Anatoly Golitsyn provided information that forced MI5 to rethink its assumptions. Golitsyn offered a complex intelligence map showing infiltration not only existed but was widespread across Western agencies. Though Golitsyn's credibility was questioned, his testimony prompted MI5 to launch an internal investigation in which Peter Wright played a key role. MI5's operational failures were the clearest evidence of infiltration. For example, an MI5 operation to bug the Soviet embassy failed spectacularly with devices detected immediately. Other efforts to track Soviet spies in London were frequently discovered and thwarted. To Wright, this couldn't be mere incompetence, but the result of a traitor alerting the enemy. Despite Wright's evidence, MI5's leadership couldn't or wouldn't face such an unacceptable truth. The idea that their director was a Soviet spy would shatter trust in the system. Instead of open investigation, MI5 chose to cover up the truth or avoid prosecution to maintain internal stability. This cover-up pushed Wright to the brink of despair, ultimately leading to his early retirement. From his suspicions about Hollis and Mitchell, Wright developed a profound view of the intelligence agency's secretive and complacent culture. He believed the lack of accountability created an environment where betrayal could thrive undetected. MI5's failure to confront the truth convinced him that only public exposure through a book could force accountability. The Spycatcher Affair, initially a legal battle to suppress the book, became a platform for Wright to air his suspicions about Hollis Mitchell and the rot within the system he once served. Harold Wilson and MI5's overreach. The Spycatcher Affair is not just a story of espionage and betrayal. It also exposed a troubling aspect of MI5, its political overreach and tendency to operate outside the law to pursue its own agendas. The tense relationship between MI5 and Labor Prime Minister Harold Wilson became a prime example of how intelligence agencies crossed boundaries, with Peter Wright at the forefront of these schemes. MI5's suspicions of Harold Wilson began in the 1940s before he became Prime Minister. Codenamed Norman John Worthington in MI5 files, Wilson was closely monitored. This interest flared when he facilitated the sale of jet engines to the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1951, a legal deal, but viewed suspiciously by some intelligence officials. His close ties with businessmen linked to the Soviet bloc further fueled doubts. When Wilson became Prime Minister in 1964, MI5's suspicions didn't wane, but intensified. Despite being the legitimate head of government, some within the agency viewed him as a threat or someone the Soviets could exploit. These allegations were amplified by the CIA, which reportedly claimed Wilson was a Soviet spy installed after the sudden death of labor leader Hugh Gaitskell in 1963. Though unproven, these accusations gave disaffected MI5 elements a pretext to act. According to Wright's revelations in Spycatcher, he participated in 2 treasonous plots to oust Wilson. The first occurred in the mid-1960s, where Wright and a small group of MI5 officers sought to gather compromising information to blackmail Wilson into resigning. They believed he was undermining national security from within. The second plot in the mid-1970s, when Wilson returned to power, was even bolder, aiming to discredit and force him out. These plots were the clearest evidence of MI5's overreach. These officers acted without legal authorization, using intelligence tools to surveil and conspire against a democratically elected prime minister. This behavior not only broke the law, but was an attack on British democracy. MI5, established to protect the state from external threats, was attempting to interfere in domestic politics. Harold Wilson, seemingly aware of some of these activities, abruptly resigned as prime minister in 1976, a decision that shocked the British political scene. He expressed concerns about an internal conspiracy against his government, a phrase many believe referred to MI5. Though Wilson never publicly accused the agency, his suspicions were later validated by Wright's revelations. Wright's role in these plots reveals a darker side of his character. Though he saw himself as a truth seeker, he was also willing to use illegal and dangerous methods to pursue what he believed was right. His actions, driven by belief in Wilson's betrayal, showed that intelligence agencies, when unchecked, could become a threat to the very democracy they were meant to protect. The revelations in Spycatcher brought this issue to the public. They forced the British government to confront a difficult question: what powers should a democratic nation grant its intelligence agencies? The story of Harold Wilson and MI5 underscored that power without accountability is a recipe for disaster. It reinforced Wright's argument that the excessive secrecy of intelligence agencies allowed them to engage in dubious activities, creating a dangerous state within a state. Ultimately, this story, along with others about espionage, contributed to Spycatcher's success and forced MI5 to reform. Victor Rothschild, a complex figure. In a story already rife with secrets and shadowy figures, Victor Rothschild emerges as a particularly complex character with a perplexing role in the Spycatcher Affair. An heir to the powerful Rothschild banking family, he chose not to focus solely on finance, but ventured into intelligence and science, becoming a major influence in British politics for decades. However, his connections to Soviet spies and his later actions made him a controversial figure. Victor Rothschild joined MI5 in 1939, just before World War II broke out. With his sharp intellect and extensive connections, he quickly became a valuable asset. However, it was during this time that his relationships with Cambridge 5 members were established and strengthened. He was close friends with Anthony Blunt, Guy Burgess, and Kim Philby from their university days. Though he later denied knowing of their espionage, MI5 files suggest he recommended individuals linked to the Soviets to MI5 and other organizations, possibly unaware of their true intentions. Rothschild's role didn't end when he left MI5 in 1945. He maintained close ties with intelligence agencies and politics, using his influence to shape key decisions and policies. He was a significant figure in academic and business circles, and his associates held pivotal government positions. According to later released documents, Rothschild played an indirect but significant role in the plot against Prime Minister Harold Wilson. As an opponent of the Labour Party and trade unions, he used his MI5 contacts to gather intelligence and support Wilson's detractors. His involvement in this plot further highlighted the lack of accountability in intelligence agencies. That a non-official could access and use classified information for personal political goals was a serious ethical breach. However, Rothschild's most controversial role was his concealment of knowledge about Soviet infiltration. Peter Wright believed Rothschild knew more than he admitted about the activities of spies like Blunt and Philby. MI5 files also suggest his wife Tess may have been a covert communist, though no clear evidence exists. This concealment, whether to protect himself, his friends, or simply to maintain the establishment's secrecy, prolonged the lack of transparency and allowed spies to operate. When Wright decided to write Spycatcher, he turned to Rothschild as a conduit to leak information about the Hollis scandal to journalist Chapman Pincher. This action underscores the complex relationships among the story's figures. Rothschild, possibly having concealed the truth in the past, became the one helping Wright reveal part of it. In MI5's internal files, Rothschild is described as arrogant and self-entitled. These descriptions, along with his actions, paint a portrait of a powerful man who believed he was above ordinary rules. He symbolized the unchecked secrecy and power of the establishment, a world Wright fought to expose. The Spycatcher Affair forced the public to question the role of figures like Rothschild. Were they protectors of the nation or individuals exploiting the system for their own ends? Rothschild's role, both victim and accomplice of a culture of cover-up, highlighted the flaws in the British intelligence system and bolstered Wright's argument that only transparency could protect democracy from internal betrayal. The Spycatcher scandal breaks. The British government's cover-up could not last forever. Though scandals were kept secret for decades, Cracks began to appear in the late 1970s, and Peter Wright delivered the decisive blow. His affair became a ticking time bomb, waiting for a trigger to explode. That trigger was Margaret Thatcher and her response to the Anthony Blunt case. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979, she was briefed by senior intelligence officials about past scandals, including Blunt's immunity as a Soviet spy. Months later, an investigative journalist exposed the truth. Thatcher was forced to address Parliament, delivering a calculated statement claiming Blunt was granted immunity for full cooperation and that the matter was handled appropriately. This statement sparked outrage in the media and political spheres, but particularly infuriated Peter Wright, retired in Tasmania. Wright, who had interrogated Blunt for 8 years, knew Thatcher's statement was untrue. He knew Blunt had concealed more than he revealed, and the immunity was a deliberate cover-up. His anger stemmed not only from the government's distortion of the truth, but also from the dismissal of his career's efforts. For Wright, Thatcher's defense of a decision he deemed wrong fueled his resolve he had to tell his story. Wright didn't act alone initially. He collaborated with renowned investigative journalist Chapman Pincher through Victor Rothschild. The complex relationship among these three revealed an underworld of leaks. Rothschild, who may have concealed the truth in the past, now facilitated exposing part of it. From 1980 to 1981, Wright provided Pincher with insider details about the Hollis scandal, including his suspicions that MI5's Director General was a Soviet spy. Pincher compiled this information in his book, Their Trade is Treachery, published in 1981. The book caused a political storm. Though not a bestseller, it prompted MPs to question the integrity of intelligence agencies. Thatcher faced Parliament again, staunchly defending the security services and attempting to discredit Pincher. However, this leak was just the beginning. Frustrated with the government's response and feeling Pincher hadn't told the full story, Wright decided the only way to reveal the entire truth was to write his own book. He began working with journalist Paul Greengrass, later a renowned Hollywood director, for a 1984 ITV World in Action interview. In this interview, Wright publicly accused Hollis and exposed MI5's failures for the first time. Surprisingly, the British government took no legal action to stop this interview or related articles. They may have believed a retired spy's words from Australia would have little impact. However, their stance changed dramatically when Wright sought to publish Spycatcher in Australia beyond British jurisdiction. The government realized that publishing this book would be a disaster, and they resolved to stop it at all costs. Thatcher's determination to suppress Spycatcher stemmed not only from protecting national secrets, but also from personal obstinacy and the need to conceal earlier leaks she had approved or known about. The affair shifted from a security issue to a personal battle between Wright and Thatcher's government, a battle the government ultimately lost spectacularly at the cost of an era of secrecy. The birth of Spycatcher. Frustrated and angered by the British government's cover-ups, Peter Wright made a fateful decision. He would write and publish a book to reveal the full truth. This was a bold move, as it challenged the government and broke his lifelong confidentiality oath. Wright's motivation was not just personal vendetta, but a deep belief that the public had a right to know about the failures and overreach within national security agencies. After his leaks to Chapman Pincher failed to bring the change he sought, Wright realized only a detailed book written by him could tell the story fully. He sought a trusted partner and found Paul Greengrass, a journalist with ITV's World in Action. Greengrass conducted an in-depth interview with Wright in 1984, where Wright publicly accused Sir Roger Hollis of being a Soviet spy for the first time. This interview caused a major stir. For the first time, a senior former intelligence officer had broken silence and exposed shocking secrets. Surprisingly, Thatcher's government did not act immediately. They issued no bans or legal measures to stop the broadcast or related articles. This silence may have been because they underestimated Wright's impact, believing a retired spy in Australia would have little influence in Britain. Moreover, attempting to censor could draw more public attention, an effect governments often avoid. However, the government's stance changed dramatically when Wright and his publisher Viking Penguin began preparing to publish Spycatcher in Australia. Realizing Wright intended to release a detailed memoir, not just vague accusations, the government decided to act. They understood that if published, the book would expose the full truth about scandals, including Blunt's case, suspicions about Hollis plots against Harold Wilson, and MI5's law-breaking culture. This was an unacceptable threat to the secrecy and integrity of intelligence agencies. In 1985, the British government took an unprecedented step. They filed a lawsuit in Australia's New South Wales Supreme Court, seeking a permanent injunction against the book's publication. Their argument was that Wright had breached his lifelong duty of confidentiality as an intelligence officer regardless of where he lived. They claimed the book's information belonged to the British government and its publication would harm national security. The legal battle began. The government's shift from silence to litigation showed they could no longer ignore Wright. Suing in a foreign country rather than just Britain demonstrated their determination to stop the book at all costs. This inadvertently made the affair an international issue, drawing global media attention. The lawsuit transformed Wright from a former spy into a symbol of free speech and the public's right to know. The government's initial inaction and subsequent overreaction revealed their confusion. They misjudged both Wright's character and the power of the media. They could have handled the matter discreetly, but instead, they turned it into a public confrontation, inadvertently promoting the book they sought to ban. Their decision raised questions. Were they overly confident in their authority, or were they driven by personal motives possibly related to protecting Thatcher's image? Whatever the answer, the birth of Spycatcher and the ensuing legal battle marked a turning point in British history. It forced intelligence agencies to step out of the shadows, face the truth, and be accountable to democracy. The legal battle. When Peter Wright and his publisher Viking Penguin moved to publish Spycatcher in Australia, they triggered one of the most contentious and costly legal battles in British history. Thatcher's government decided they must stop the book at all costs, using every legal tool available. In 1985, the British government took an unprecedented step. They filed a lawsuit in Australia's New South Wales Supreme Court, seeking a permanent injunction against the book's publication. Their argument was clear. Wright had breached his lifelong duty of confidentiality as an intelligence officer. They claimed the book's information was British government property and its publication would severely harm national security. This argument seemed reasonable in Britain, where the Official Secrets Act applied. But in Australia, an independent nation with its own laws, it faced significant challenges. The legal battle wasn't confined to Australia. The British government pursued bans in New Zealand, Hong Kong, and other countries worldwide. Their goal was to create a global legal blanket to prevent the book's publication. In Britain, newspapers faced harsh injunctions, barred from reporting on the case's content or even quoting book excerpts. This created an ironic situation where a book banned in Britain became headline news globally. The centerpiece of the Australian legal battle was the testimony of Sir Robert Armstrong, Britain's cabinet secretary. Sent to testify for the government, Armstrong was cornered during cross-examination by Wright's lawyer, Malcolm Turnbull, later Australia's Prime Minister. Armstrong was forced to admit he had been economical with the truth, a euphemism for lying or concealing the truth in his testimony. Turnbull presented undeniable evidence of the British government's hypocrisy. He pointed out that the government had previously allowed leaks to Chapman Pincher and even collaborated with him to discredit Wright. Turnbull argued that if the government permitted Pincher to publish, there was no reason to stop Wright. He challenged Armstrong's credibility, proving the government had lied and covered up the truth. Turnbull's cross-examination not only damaged Armstrong's reputation, but exposed the legal battle's true nature. It wasn't a fight to protect national security, but an effort to hide past embarrassments and mistakes. Turnbull convincingly argued that banning the book wouldn't protect secrets, as its contents were already widely leaked and discussed. The British government's defeat in the Australian court was a major blow. The judge ruled that their argument lacked merit and dismissed the injunction request. This ruling set a significant precedent, showing that government power couldn't override the law and free speech. This costly and reputation-damaging legal battle had profound implications. It forced intelligence agencies to face public scrutiny and demonstrated they couldn't operate outside the law indefinitely. It also reinforced the role of the press and judiciary as checks on government power. Ultimately, the government's loss paved the way for the book's publication, transforming Wright from an outsider to a hero, and bringing the story of rot within Britain's security agencies to the world. The book's publication, despite the British government's best efforts to prevent Spycatcher's publication, they failed spectacularly. After losing in the Australian court, they couldn't stop a wave of publications in the United States and other countries where their legal authority held no sway. The publication of Spycatcher was not just a legal victory, but a moral and media triumph. The book quickly became a global phenomenon, and the government's desperate attempts to suppress it only made it more famous. The final blow to the British government came from Viking Penguin's decision to publish Spycatcher in the United States, a market beyond British bans. Millions of copies were printed and sold immediately. Though officially banned in Britain, copies found their way back sold covertly in bookstores and on street corners. An iconic image of the era was street vendors outside Parliament, selling illegal copies to politicians and the public. Spycatcher's publication had a massive global impact. Excerpts were read aloud in the European Parliament, mocking British censorship. Ironically, the British government through Her Majesty's Stationery Office. HMSO inadvertently published these excerpts in official parliamentary records. This highlighted the government's confusion and inefficiency in controlling information. In Britain, public libraries faced a dilemma. Though the book was banned should they circulate it, most complied with the ban, but the issue sparked a heated debate about the right to access information. The media exploited every legal loophole to report on the book. An Italian restaurant in Aberdeen even gave away free copies with meals, a defiant and humorous act. The legal battle's outcome was a complete defeat for the British government. They spent millions of pounds on lawyers and court costs only to lose and damage their global reputation. Their efforts to protect national secrets were exposed as an attempt to cover up past embarrassments and mistakes. Instead of being seen as security protectors, the government was viewed as a censoring regime trying to stifle press freedom. The Spycatcher Affair had profound implications. It set a crucial precedent showing that governments couldn't use absolute power to control information in an increasingly connected world. Wright's battle was not just about a book, but a fundamental democratic principle. Public institutions must be accountable to the public. The government's defeat forced them to change. Spycatcher's publication ended an era where British intelligence agencies operated in the shadows. It forced MI5 and MI6 to face scrutiny and accountability. Though Peter Wright may be a controversial figure, his actions undeniably played a critical role in bringing security agencies out of their cloak and into the light of modern democracy. Outcome and implications. The Spycatcher Affair didn't end with a book's publication. It was a historic turning point, marking the British government's failure and the dawn of a new era for intelligence agencies. The protracted and scandalous legal battle had far-reaching consequences, permanently altering the relationship between the state security agencies and the public. The British government's failure. Margaret Thatcher's government lost lawsuits globally. Their efforts to ban the book in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere failed. The legal battle consumed millions of pounds in taxpayer money and severely damaged Britain's international reputation. The decision to pursue the fight, despite clear defeat, showed Thatcher's obstinacy. Her motives were not just about protecting national secrets, but also about upholding a core tenet of her political foundation: absolute state, authority, and control. By trying to conceal earlier leaks, including those she approved with Chapman Pincher Thatcher, turned the affair into a personal battle. She believed secrecy was key to order and security, and Spycatcher's challenge to this belief was something she couldn't tolerate. Impact on MI5 and MI6. Despite the government's loss, Peter Wright and his book achieved a monumental victory. Spycatcher became a global bestseller with over 4 million copies sold. It forced intelligence agencies out of the shadows. For decades, MI5 and MI6 operated without legal oversight, with secret budgets and activities. The Spycatcher Affair ended that era. Wright's revelations sparked public outrage and forced Parliament to act. The result was the Intelligence Services Act of 1994, which for the first time brought MI5 and MI6 under a legal framework defining their powers, limits, and responsibilities. A parliamentary oversight committee was established to monitor their activities, ensuring they no longer operated outside the law. The bugging and burgling culture Wright exposed was effectively ended, and intelligence agencies were compelled to comply with legal regulations and respect civil liberties. Legacy of the affair. The legacy of the Spycatcher Affair is undeniable. It exposed the full extent of Soviet infiltration into Britain's political and security systems, shedding light on cases like the Cambridge Five and suspicions about MI5 leaders. It also revealed the mistakes and overreach of an unaccountable system. However, its greatest significance was reinforcing the importance of press freedom and the public's right to know. It proved that in a democracy, no agency, no matter how critical, can operate in complete secrecy without oversight. Peter Wright, though controversial, became a symbol of this struggle. Ultimately, his story forced security agencies to be accountable, moving them from a secretive world rife with mistakes to organizations governed and scrutinized by the law. The Spycatcher Affair was not an isolated event, but a pivotal turning point, a powerful warning about the dangers of unchecked power. It brought MI5 and MI6 out of the cold, paving the way for a more transparent and accountable era in British intelligence.